So something tells me this isn't right. Yeah, that's not shooting staples. Yeah, whatever's supposed to grab that ram is not grabbing it. Spoiler alert, so the problem is right here. This thing you might call the ram that pushes the staple in actually is sticking out too far. I've got a buck-tooth staple gun. Well, I've never taken one of these apart before, but you just look for the appropriate fasteners and you start taking things apart. First this E-clip comes off, and then that allows this pin to be released. I fumbled around quite a bit trying to take this thing apart. It'll be a bit clearer, I think, when I just reassemble it. So I'll show you some of the disassembly, but most of the information I think is going to be in the reassembly. So this is an interesting part here. This is sort of a pivot point, and the handle grabs onto that. And when you squeeze the handle, it lifts this up, which lifts the ram with it. Here, once again, is that ram kind of sitting proud of the whole assembly, and I think that's the whole problem. That thing is just too far down, and that prevents the hook that grabs onto it from reaching it. These little side plates that pop out here act as a sort of a guide, but also kind of as a bearing for this pivot point. Once again, I hope it'll be a little bit clearer once I get to reassembling everything. Here's a decent view of this one piece that actually just receives the two springs that push down from the top. So here's the crux of the problem, I think. You can barely see it, but there's this sort of hook that's supposed to hook the ram, and I think that's what's not happening. I think it can't quite hook the ram. Because, as I pointed out earlier, the ram is kind of sitting too low, so the hook doesn't quite engage with it. So here you get a better angle on that hook. So that needs to slide down and then just hook underneath the ram to be able to pull it up. So here's a slightly closer view. This is the top plate of the ram. And so when that hook gets down far enough, then it can hook onto it and be able to pull it up when you press down on the handle. But I think with repeated use, the block that's holding that plate up gets squished and compressed, and that's what's causing the ram to get lower and be just out of reach of that hook. So here I'm just going to put a clamp on to try and pull the ram back and release some of the pressure on it. And the objective is to try and be able to see better the gap, because the ram hits this block, and I'm going to try and I'm going to be able to remove that block, just slide it out. So here's the block that I just pulled out. It's my belief that this is just a piece of plastic. And my belief is this thing has just had the crap beat out of it, so it's sort of flattened out. And so the ram, by hitting it so hard, has compressed it. And so here what I'm doing is putting a screw in to try and give it a little higher profile so that the ram doesn't go down as far. And you can see that I'll be able to slide it in with no problem. So now with that slightly higher profile for that block, the ram in fact doesn't go down as far. So now the question will be whether or not the hook will engage with the ram again. Okay, here starts reassembly. There are actually two hooks with this sort of plastic pivot in between them. After that, these two guide plates go in on each side. Before the handle is inserted, the plastic pivot piece needs to be oriented correctly. There's an arrow on the side of it that needs to point roughly up. To hold things in place better while I was trying to assemble it, I decided to use some of this tape to just keep things in so they didn't fall out. The handle is actually, of course, two pieces, a metal piece and a plastic piece, and then there's this pin that fits inside it. And then there's another pivotal piece, literally a pivotal piece of metal that slides in and holds the handle in place, and it also ends up anchoring sort of the body piece because it hooks onto it. Okay, one more piece of tape to hold the handle in place. This is just in preparation for putting those springs back in. So here I'm inserting that piece I pointed out earlier that receives the bottom of the springs, and then I put in the 2 springs. So naturally, as I was trying to insert the springs and slide them over that piece on the bottom, it popped out. So then I had to put that back in and then start over again. Here I'm just using a screwdriver to hold that bottom piece, that metal piece that receives the springs, in place while I move the springs. Okay, with all done, now it's time to remove the tape and then put the rest of the body on. As I mentioned earlier, the body slides up on that pin that went through the handle, so that really anchors and solidifies the whole assembly. Okay, with the body back in place, then I just put this extra pin in. I didn't put the E-clip on, I just sort of held it in place while I wanted to test it out. So what I found was that it worked, but for whatever reason the handle wasn't popping up again. But when I pulled back up on it, then it reset, and then I tried it again. So something having to do with those springs isn't working right, but it's not a big hassle, you just pull up on the handle. So I put the E-clip back on, and now it's time to load it up with staples and really try it out. So it's back to working. I do still have to pull the handle up, but other than that, it's shooting staples, so I'm happy. I hope this helps you out.